When you've been in the game as long as I have, you've pretty much seen and heard it all, and you have reference experiences, right? And so you can draw on those for inspiration, for understanding, etc. But when you're just starting out, you haven't had those experiences, you may be a little lost and confused. So I want to share that with you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you 5 fairly interesting, astounding stories that reflect on female psychology so you can sort of understand my mental roadmap a little bit better. Now, the first one I want to share with you is probably the least shocking, least surprising, most common, but also extremely informative, which is the first girl that was ever my real girlfriend. The first time we had sex, we're rolling around in bed, we barely know each other. We've known each other just a few hours, right? And it's not LMR, but she's certainly not sure about having sex with me. And then we're kind of fooling around, kissing, feeling each other up. She stops completely cold and she looks at me and she's like, wait, what's your middle name? I told her my middle name, and then almost immediately, like within a minute, we're having sex. Right? And so just telling her my middle name was a switch for her, where it's like, okay, it's okay. Right? Up until then, it wasn't enough comfort. Telling her my middle name served as enough comfort to make it okay. And that's pretty arbitrary. If you think about it, it's pretty arbitrary. It doesn't really make a ton of sense. But the point is, every girl has her own model of the world. Every girl has her own idea of romance, her idea of comfort, her idea of the relationship. And if you can play along with that model, you're going to be very, very successful. If you can't play along with that model, then you're going to get yourself into trouble and it's not going to work out very well for you. So that's the lesson from that one. Least astonishing of the stories, but it's a good anecdote. Next one is a pretty interesting one. So I'm in Vegas with a wingman. We're talking to 2 girls. They need to go to the bathroom. We walk them to the bathroom and they spend forever in there. They're clearly talking about, do we want to go home with these guys, etc., etc. They come out of the bathroom and my girl says to me, they're like kind of walking off. I stop my girl and she's still into me. She says, hey, listen, if you want to stay in the game, you have to find another friend for my friend, which means basically you can sleep with me if you find an attractive friend for my friend, right? Because you know that they were in there talking and she's fighting for going home with me, right? So I said, okay, fine, what's your friend's type? Found out what her type was, and then I texted a couple of my friends who met that type to meet me at another place in the bar, and then I walked these girls across the club to go meet my friends, because I couldn't just stand there and wait for my friend, that'd be a little too much. So I walked them across the bar to meet them. Now, this was a crowded Vegas club, and walking them across was a fucking ordeal. Like, we were pushed and shoved and jostled and told to move and squeezed and all kinds of stuff. So it was really, really difficult. When we got to the other side of the club, her friend met my friend and they hit it off. My girl, who had been so down to sleep with me, basically, suddenly hated me. She's like, fuck you, I hate you, you're ruining my Vegas trip, you're acting like my boyfriend, I don't even know you, you're so jealous, you're so weird, I don't even trust you, etc., etc., etc. And she yelled and screamed. It was impossibly difficult for probably about 15 minutes. And she even tried to hit on other guys, tried to make me jealous, tried to give me shit. She threatened to call the bouncer at one point. It was absolutely ridiculous. And then eventually her friend was like, what, are you being stupid? This guy's amazing. Convinced her, and then we all went home and slept together. So the interesting female psychology point there is, why did she get so angry at me? She was basically ready to sleep with me. She told me how to do it, get a friend for my friend. I went and did it, and then she flipped out on me and thought I was fucking like the asshole of the century. Why was that? Well, you have to look at it this way. Up until that moment, I had been very much not tryhard. I had done good game, which means it appeared to just happen. I appeared aloof and cool and abundant, non-needy, all those kind of things. Me walking her across that arduous club with so much effort to get to the other side, to find a guy for her friend, was a lot of effort, right? That indicates that I have an agenda. It indicates that I have an outcome. It indicates that I care about sleeping with her. So all of a sudden I went from cool guy who she can't have to guy who worked really hard to get in my pants. Girls hate that, right? Girls hate that. It didn't just happen. It makes them feel slutty, and it makes you seem lower value in their eyes. And that's why she suddenly flipped on me. And I was lucky to be able to turn it around. But that's a big lesson that can apply to a lot of other areas of game. All right, next one is a European particular one. So we're in Sweden doing a program, and a friend of mine opens this hot Swedish girl. I open her hot friend. So we're talking to the 2 of them, and it's going relatively well, but then they have this guy friend that's with them that's just kind of hanging out. And eventually, I get to the point where I'm like, this isn't going to go anywhere. We try the different pulling things, and they just aren't willing to leave the guy, right? It just doesn't seem like it's very likely. And then my friend kind of his set starts going less well, so we end up just leaving, right? Now we're leaving the club a little bit later, and I happen to run into the girl my friend was talking to. I barely talked to this girl, but she just immediately was like, oh, hey, it's you, takes me under her wing, and we go to try and find my friend and find her friend. We find them, we also find the dude they're with, but her friend invites us all to come back to her place and come after party, right? So, okay, we're like, okay, well, let's see how it happens. I don't like that the guy's there, but it's looking good. We get back to her place, and it's just awful, And it's just completely platonic. The guy is just sitting in the middle of everything, won't leave, or just the girls want him to leave, we want him to leave, but he just won't go. And the longer it goes, the more it seems pointless, the more it seems like it's not going anywhere. Meanwhile, my girl's completely, like, she goes to bed, right? So I'm trying to help my wingman get with his girl, but he's like, nah, I give up, it doesn't work, you go talk to her. So I start talking to her, but every single time I try and make it sexual in any way, every time I make it man to woman, she tenses up, she gets weird, and she keeps still giving me all this stuff about, like, oh no, I'm looking for, like, real love, I'm done with partying, all that kind of stuff. And so I'm like, this is fucking going nowhere, it's a waste of time. And again, every time I try and make it sexual, it's just going nowhere. So eventually we're just like, okay, well, it's been a fun night, we're gonna go. Turns out that she's living the same direction as us, so we split an Uber home, and we're just gonna drop her off on the way. And again, I'm like, hey, to my friend, I'm like, you try one more time, just, go for it or whatever. Get in the back seat with her. He's like, no, you do it. I'm like, you sure? It's fine, I get in the back seat. We sit there the entire ride home, we don't even say a single word to each other. Then as we're pulling up to her apartment, she's like, so are you coming up? I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? So we get out, she's like, it's kind of messy though, you have to help me make the bed. So obviously from there, things go really, really well. So the thing that was super surprising there is there was no indication of attraction, like none, okay? Like even when I tried to make it man to woman even a little bit, she reacted negatively. Also, I had very little history with her. Like she'd actually talk to my friend most of the time, barely even talk to me. But the lesson here is don't trust her words, trust her actions, and trust logistics, okay? What had happened was she had met up with me and tried to get us all together, and she'd invited us somewhere. That's absolutely huge. So logistics there and actions, totally huge. The other thing is just the simple value of being the last guy there at the end of the night. That is so critical, okay? Even if she barely likes you, even if there's no attraction whatsoever, even if she barely knows you, you have no idea how many times just by being the guy who ends up one-on-one with the girl at the end of the night, I've gotten laid, all right? And so that's a huge lesson and a huge takeaway for so many situations in pickup. Okay, next story. It was the first time that I ever invited two girls on the same date. And to be fair, I didn't do this intentionally. The reason I did it is because both of them seemed flaky. One of them, the girl seemed to really like me, but she had indicated maybe she couldn't make it, so I kind of had that slot open and I didn't know what to do. The other girl was a really bad pickup. It was actually I chased this girl down out of the park, and she'd been walking the whole time, barely even talking to me. I finally got her to stop for 10 seconds at the end, and we got a number close. So I thought it was just the shittiest set ever. I just texted her just out of due diligence. But funny enough, she's texted back and set plans really, really easily with me. But there was no connection there. So I figured there's a chance she'd flake just because it's a shitty set. And I had one night in town, so I just invited both girls out, all right? Both girls showed up. I actually brought a wingman with me to wing the date, just so it was plausible that I'm just hanging out with friends in general. And I tried to get him to talk with me, but neither one of the girls were having anything to do with him. So it ended up a situation where both girls ended up kind of competing with me. The one who I thought was more into me, but who was a little less hot and a little less confident, actually gave up, left me with the really hot one who I thought I had no connection with, ended up taking her home, and good things ensued. Now, what's the lesson there? The lesson there is a really interesting one, which is, how is it that I was able to get away with inviting two girls on the same date? You'd think that'd be incredibly rude. You'd think they'd show up and just be like, well, fuck you. I don't do double dates. Who the fuck do you think you are, Mr. Player? Here's the funny thing. When they showed up to the date, the premise wasn't let's go on a romantic date. The premise was, hey, let's hang out and get to know each other. So if your premise is let's hang out and get to know each other, and she shows up and there's another girl and another guy there, she can't really object. She can't be angry. The only way she can get angry is if she's like, hey, listen, I really liked you. I wanted a romantic date with you. And if she wants to admit that to herself and admit that to me, then that's a positive kind of outcome from the date anyway. Right? So there's really no downside. There's really no downside in what I was able to do is I was able to make them compete. And I truly believe that really hot girl that I pulled, I would have had a lot of trouble pulling her without the other girl there, because that value gap did a lot for me, and we really didn't even have that much chemistry. We didn't really get along fundamentally that well. But the fact that she was competing, it kind of got her ego riled up, it got her chasing me, and it gave me a window of opportunity that I might not have otherwise had. The last story is a truly crazy one. So I was out, and me and a friend of mine started talking to these two girls near the bar, and they really like us. However, it turns out that there's two guys at the bar buying them drinks who they've been talking to the entire evening. The girls really like us, and they really would prefer to talk to us than these guys, but they're in this weird socially obligated position. So hey, can we grab a drink with these guys and then just come back? I'm like, okay, fine, do what you're gonna do. And they go and do it, and then I'm like, well, is this really worth it, et cetera, et cetera. I'm talking to my wingman. We're about to leave, and as I turn to go, the girl puts out her hand and grabs me by the arm to keep me from leaving. So I'm like, okay, well, that's a pretty strong indicator. I guess I'll stay. We stay, the girls end up coming with us, and I end up kind of walking my girl out like we're gonna take her home. However, my girl's still carrying a drink as we leave the bar, and so we get stopped by the bouncer at the entrance. And this guy who'd been talking to her all night happens to come over right about that same time. And I won't get into exactly the details, but because of some weird like clusterfuck with the bouncers and leaving the club, we got kind of like put together in a little group where we were kind of like stuck together and forced to interact. And so the guy like puts his arm around the girl, and the girl doesn't really like it per se, but he was talking to her all night, and she did like him for a bit, and so she allows it. And anyway, things kind of escalate. We stayed together because we can't part from the guy for a while. And eventually the girl remembers she liked the guy too. We end up in a situation where she's holding the guy's hand in one of hers, my hand in the other one of hers, and she's like, I don't know what to do. My wingman walks by and just like jokingly is like, why don't you just go home with them both? And you see this little flash in the girl's eyes. She's like, that's interesting. And so I thought to myself, and I started playing it up. And so I started suggesting like that I like her because she's very adventurous, and like she seems like a really fun, like crazy girl, and I think we could have like a lot of fun being passionate together and shit like that. And the other guy's getting like more and more nervous because he, first of all, lost her to me in the first place, so he's nervous he's gonna lose her again. Secondly, he doesn't understand what's going on. He doesn't really understand female psychology that well, and so he's like confused what's going on. Anyway, end of the day, the girl says, you know what, I've got an idea. Why don't I just take you guys both home? And I can tell the guy's nervous about it, so I'm like, yeah, that could be really fun. And I just look at her and like kind of give her like the sexual look. She looks at the other guy and she's like, what do you think? He's like, no, we have this connection and it'd be better if it was just us. And she looks at him and she's like, really? And like gets this like look of disgust on her face. And he's like, yeah, I think blah, 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 blah. And she takes his hand and holds it up like this and looks at it like threatening. Is like, really? As in, I'm gonna drop your hand if you say really. But he didn't get the message. He's like, yeah, no, I think. And she just goes, poof, hand released, off with me, and goes home with me. Now that's a fucking crazy one, right? That's insane. Why did she go home with me? What's going on there? Well, a couple things. Number one, you may not know this, but a lot of girls, it is their fantasy to do the devil's threesome, to do the two guys and a girl threesome. A lot of girls are very, very into that, and it's a very intriguing thing for them. So it's actually a card you can play in various ways to your benefit. But more importantly, she had a choice between one guy who seems sexually free and interesting and seems like he's in the secret society, i.e. the guys who have sex and know about sex and understand female psychology. And then she has the guy that's like Mr. Romantic White Knight, right? Inherently to women, that's almost always gonna appear lower value, less exciting, less fun, etc. So in a direct comparison, she looks high value guy that gets it, low value guy that doesn't get it, right? It's an easy choice for her. And so the guy, because he didn't know female psychology and because he wasn't willing to be a risk taker, he lost and I won.